Grade 9, so welcome to this last shift video on demand and supply. So make sure you watch it if you haven't watched it yet. And today I'm going to talk about what happens if there's a change in demand or supply. But first we need to understand the factors that will influence these changes. Now let's talk about demand. So when we look at demand, this is what we as customers want to pay for. I'm willing and able to pay a specific price for a certain amount of items. So let's say I want to buy coffee. I don't want to pay 50 Rand for a coffee, but for 20 Rand, I actually want to take my wife out for a coffee as well because it's affordable, right? But for 30 Rand, that's now getting to a limit where I say, okay, I'll still take her, but now I can actually feel the pinch. So I'm going to think twice on how many times I'm going to do it. All right. So when we look at the demand, we know it's a relationship between price and quantity demanded. So the factors that will influence the change in demand is number one, my income, my consumer income. If I have more expendable income, my demand might change, right? So let's say I have more money available, then I would actually for the same price be willing to buy more. Now I'll explain that a bit later. Let's look at all the different changes of demands. If there's a change in consumer taste, if there's more people that want to drink coffee, then that has got an influence on it. If there's related goods, if the prices of related goods increase, that will create a higher demand for my product. Whereas if the prices for related goods drop, then my product's demand will decrease. For example, if I sell coffee and the price for tea decreases, then more people will want to actually drink tea, right? Or let's say competitive products. If I've got Nescafe and Jacobs, there's constantly this battle. So the demand for the products is actually shown on this graph if there's a change in consumer tastes. Or another factor is the change of expected future prices. So let's take sunflower oil for example. People that heard that the sunflower oil will go up in the near future have started stocking up. So the price, at the same price currently, there's a higher demand. I'm going to show you how that looks in a second. And if there's more potential buyers, if your market has grown, the demand will increase. So how does that look visually? Now you have to first understand that, let's say the demand for a product at 3 Rand, right, is 2 units. We all know that. But now let's say the income of the consumers increase. Now that leads to them at the same price, right, would actually want to buy more. So this whole graph will shift to the right, okay? Which means it shifts from D1, and this is now why we write D1 and D2. If there's an increase, red is always if there's an increase in demand, my demand graph will shift to the right. The opposite is true as well. If there's a decrease in consumer income or lower taste, consumer taste, or the price of related products is much cheaper and therefore the demand decreases, then I'll experience an inward shift, right? So that means my graph will move to the left and there's a change in demand. This is how it is visually explained. Let's look at supply. If the factors that we have to consider is very similar to the factors of demand. So it's the prices of your factors of production. In example, your input cost. If your input costs increase, that means I will not be able to supply as much as I want to because it costs more. If the technology changes, that's either a positive impact, that means I can produce more at a lower cost, depending on the cost of technology. The number of suppliers that enters the market will determine how much I can supply, because if there's now 10 people supplying the same coffee as that I'm supplying, I will not be able to supply the same quantity because the market has shrunk. The price of substitute goods, if I drink coffee versus tea, that's got the influence on how much I will supply, and the prices of competitive or complementary products like tomato sauce and hot dog buns and boerewors, right? Those three are complementary because you use them to add value to the others, right? Just boerewors alone without a hot dog bun, without tomato sauce, it's a different flavor than when you sell a hot dog. That's a complete product. So tomato sauce in this sentence would be a complementary product. So what happens? Let's look at it. Let's say my prices increase, right, of my factors of production. That means I'm paying more. My input cost is higher. Then that would have an input on my supply. I won't be able to supply as much because it cost me more. So then in this case, my supply graph would move to the left, right? But let's say I've got my supply graph increases, right? So actually I've used the wrong color. If my supply graph decreases, it moves to the left. Let's try and do it right. So if my supply decreases, remember when it decreases, it always moves to the left. If there's an increase in demand or supply, it always moves to the right. Okay. And it's important to number your graphs. Now, the last video I'm going to make is if we have a supply and demand where there's market equilibrium and there's a change in demand, and then we're going to see something else. So make sure you watch my last video, and with this, make sure you go through the textbook. We're on page 86 to 89, and if you have questions, you have my email. Please send me an email.